he turned the revolution into an Islamic revolution.
Yeah. Well, before we get into the politics of this whole thing, because you mentioned that you have talked about your own experiences in this book.
Yeah.
Tell me about it. Let me ask you this first. As an American, you said that at the beginning you were apprehensive to go because you were hearing all this, scary stuff about Iran and maybe Iranians. And what was your own experience after you left, after you went there?
I've had wonderful experiences there. I've had some that aren't so wonderful too, but by and large, particularly
You can tell us both.
ordinary Iranians, have been fantastic. And I've been in people's homes, and not just in North Tehran where the elite lives, but in other parts of the city, and in Isfahan and in Kashan and Abiyaneh and other places that I've had a chance to travel.
Have you gone to Shiraz?
I haven't been to Shiraz.
That's my
which
hometown.
Oh, well, I've met people from Shiraz, many, and I know that I have to go, so maybe my next trip, and inshallah, I'll get to Shiraz.
Inshallah, we go together.
I'd love to, because I know about the roses and all the things that Shiraz is famous for. But I've always been treated very well. People have stuffed me with good food, and
what stands out, if there's one thing stands out about Iranian? As far as their interactions, I mean.
I write about it, especially in the first chapter, some of the experiences. There was a gentleman I met. I went to do a story about Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, so I went to his hometown, and I went to an area just near his hometown where I had my first meal on the floor, on the sofra. We sat in the living room cross-legged, and there was an old farmer who spread out a cloth, and his wife would not eat with us. She was just in the kitchen. She would come out and she would put the dishes on the floor, the pots on the floor, and then she would go and sort of hide in the doorway and peek at me from the doorway while we were eating. And this guy, he was very nationalistic. He was very proud. And he said, "Oh, you Americans, you can't threaten us and you can't do anything to us. And if we want nuclear power, we'll have nuclear power." And
that's the point that we're going to elaborate later. And how this nationalism versus everything else.
But he held up a glass of water and he said, "This glass of water is worth more to me than anything you have in your country." And he went on. And at the end of it, he looked at me and he kind of, grinned. And he was joking and teasing, and he said, "Can you find me an American wife?"
That comes the contradictions in Iran.
So
Barbara,
it was beautiful.
You hold on to your thought. I want to give a short break because I want people who want to go do something, go do it, and come back to this fascinating story. Okay, we're going to be back in a few seconds, just a short break. All right, you were telling me about going to Ahmadinejad's to visit
his hometown, where he
his
was born.
hometown, and people, how they received you. Okay, we were talking about your experiences in Iran. Do you like to give us more stories?
Sure. Another one of the stories I talk about in the book, I was at a February 11th rally. This is the day when they celebrate the revolution and the collapse of the Shah's last government in 1979. And Ahmadinejad was giving his first Revolution Day speech, and he was up, on this big stage, haranguing the audience and yelling "Death to America" and all these other slogans that that they say, but people really don't believe very much
Believe
anymore.
me, they don't even mean it themselves.
No,
it's just
they don't.
Political propaganda.
And they bring people in on buses from factories, and school kids especially. They bring them in on buses and they make them go to this rally. And there were a bunch of girls, maybe they were 10, 11, 12, in chadors, in these black cloaks, and they had placards on them saying nuclear energy is our natural right. And they were standing close to where the press was standing. I was on kind of a wooden scaffolding. And they saw me, and they figured that I wasn't Iranian because of my clothes and whatnot. And one of them asked me, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from the United States." So they started whispering, "America, America, you know, she's from America." And they started passing me little pieces of paper, and they'd say, "We want your name, write your autograph."
Wanted your autograph while they're yelling over there, "Death to America."
So I called the first chapter, I called it "Death to America," and "Can I have your autograph?" You know, because, again, it's this contradiction, you know. Americans especially, they see and hear one thing. But if you go there and you meet the people, you see and hear another thing.
That's exactly the heart of the story. I have interviewed quite a few American, either author or otherwise, and they all say the same thing, that we were so scared to go, or they are married to American wives, or, you know, and they say we were so scared to go, and when we went there, it was totally different landscape as far as you know, social and cultural, and how we were received, and you know, the experiences they have. Well, I'm sure you can go on and on about your experiences, but let's get back to your book. What is the central theme in your book?
The central theme is missed opportunities for reconciliation. There have been a number of efforts over the last 30 years to try to bring the United States and Iran back together. And
these missed opportunities, you're talking about the two administrations,
the two
this
administrations,
one and the previous one. Do you like to elaborate? Let's talk about Clinton era first. What Clinton missed, or what Iran missed, either or.
I think both missed. You had a period, if we go back just a little bit more, the first Bush administration, the Bush the father, actually did try to make some approaches to Iran, and the Iranians chickened out. They even had a meeting scheduled in 1990 in Geneva, and the Iranians backed out at the last minute.
Do you have any idea why from your investigations?
You know, I think it was too controversial at that time for Iran, and the system there was not confident enough, not self-confident enough to have this breakthrough with the United States. It was too controversial. Then we got Clinton. And the first thing Clinton did was he put in a policy called dual containment, which was to isolate both Iraq and Iran. And he put comprehensive sanctions on Iran. Before that, U.S. companies had actually been working there and pumping oil and doing business with Iran. But Clinton shut all of that down. There was a lot of pressure at that time from the Republican Congress. The Congress had just switched in 1994 to Republican control. And there was pressure also from pro-Israel groups, a lot of pressure. At that time, to put complete sanctions on Iran. They were already worried about the Iranian nuclear program, which was still in kind of a...
Even then?
Even then, this is 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago. So he put comprehensive sanctions on. And then in Iran, in 1997, they had an election, and they had a surprise victor. Mohammad Khatami became the president. And one of the first things he did was he gave a big interview to CNN, Christiane Amanpour, and he called for a dialogue of civilizations with the United States.
I was there actually at the United Nations when he
came. Yeah. He adopted a completely different rhetoric. He stopped with the death to America. He started talking about building bridges. And, you know, Clinton was very impressed, and he wanted to try to reciprocate. And so he began to re-examine U.S. policy toward Iran.
So
there was
what happened then?
There was a slight easing of sanctions on pistachio nuts and carpets. Madeleine Albright gave a very important speech in March 2000 where she basically apologized for overthrowing Mossadegh and also for taking the side of Iraq in the Iran-Iraq War.
Which was a huge mistake.
8-year war. We supported Saddam Hussein. You know, nearly 1 million people were killed and wounded. About 200,000, 300,000 Iranians were killed. It was devastating. And the U.S. backed Saddam, and so did most of the rest of the world. So she apologized for that, and it was an important speech, but she made one mistake. She talked about the Iranian government. She talked about the elected part and the unelected part. So she was praising Khatami and his people, and she was insulting
and ignoring
the supreme leader, the clerics, who of course are a very important part of the system and who are more powerful in many ways than the elected part. And she talked about unelected hands, and this was very poorly received in Iran. And it forced the Iranian diplomats. I remember after she spoke, the Iranian ambassador to the UN spoke, and he picked up that part because, of course, he owed his job to the supreme leader. as
Makes
much
sense.
as he did to Hatami.